Access to services is often a critical lifeline and keys to possibilities when you live with or are supporting someone with a developmental disability. However, when that increased sense of independence and societal belonging is tied to provincial funding, which in large part has been inadequately addressed by our provincial government, the keys to hope and prosperity take a back burner, which is why it's important to note the importance for advocacy surrounding this issue. People living with developmental disabilities across the province of Ontario are sending an urgent appeal to the Ontario government to take action. The reason is fundamentally clear. Over 52,000 people across the province living or supporting someone with developmental disabilities are currently waiting on waiting lists for critical services and supports due to serious funding shortfalls across the sector. Since 1993, the Ontario government has increased core funding to support these agencies across the province by less than 7%. Meanwhile, the cost of living has soared to be over 60% during that same time span. Developmental service agencies from across the province are sounding the alarm and saying that the current system is no longer sustainable as currently constituted, including community living Essex County. And joining me this week to have an in-depth discussion about the urgency of the matter are Karen Bolger, the Executive Director of Community Living Essex County, and Corey Dalglish, the Director of Community Operations for Community Living Essex County. The pair joined me to discuss how the funding shortfall has affected and impacted services across both their agency and the province. And they also joined me to shed light on the action that needs to be taken by the provincial government and community stakeholders at large to rectify this increasingly and intriguingly important issue so that everyone with developmental disabilities from across the province truly has the opportunity to live a meaningful and inclusive lifestyle where the journey to belonging can truly be realized. I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. I began by asking the pair to discuss the urgency of the matter and the action which needs to be taken to address the funding shortfall.
Well, I think it's urgent because there are 50, as you said, 52,000 people in Ontario that are languishing on wait lists, waiting for, really critical supports and services that they're not receiving. And those supports and services range from accommodation support. Some people require 24-hour supports, independent living, community participation, employment supports. It could be respite supports for families so that they get a little bit of a break so that they can go back to their caregiving. It's a huge crisis, and people are sitting on those wait lists.
Bolger also emphasized the importance of continual conversation between community stakeholders, agencies, and the government alike to make sure that the funding for operational reasons remains consistent.
Well, I think, Kevin, we received from the Ontario government last year about a 3% increase, which was hugely, hugely appreciated. It really helped to, and that was really in our base funding of developmental service agencies. There was no funding that was used to expand services for people and families. So we are really appreciative of that funding. We advocated very strongly throughout the sector last year for an increase, and that was hugely helpful in terms of helping us to keep the lights on, helping us to, as a sector, not have to continue to shut down locations or programs or reduce their supports and services. What we asked for from our government for agencies like ours is a commitment for ongoing and sustainable increases annually. As inflationary costs go up, as those, we can't address the waiting list, the 52,000 people on the waiting list, when we're barely getting by with trying to support the current people that we provide supports and services to. So our request is ongoing funding for agencies like ours, but also to provide individualized funding to people and families on those wait lists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And more broadly, I'm curious to know your message to the Ontario government regarding the actions that needed to be taken around this issue and how can they be an ally for individuals with developmental disabilities in terms of helping them live and supplying them with the resources to live a meaningful life. What are your thoughts there?
Do you want me to answer this, Corey? Do you want to jump in?
I can jump in if you
Sure.
like. Sure. I think this one, I think low-hanging fruit. Our message is incredibly clear, and that's that the developmental service sector urgently needs increase and sustainable funding. It's essential to reduce the wait list, to support people in leading meaningful lives, to ensure people are integrated into the larger society. We're also calling on the government to help address ongoing workforce challenges, providing adequate resources for competitive compensation, to continue in their commitment to develop skills throughout the sector and our workforce. But it starts with ensuring availability of services that people require. And important to note, this is not just a financial investment; it's a moral responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the emotional impact of the morale of the frontline workers who are doing the frontline work and supporting these families and individuals each and every day. What's your message to the general public and to families at large about the importance of supporting these frontline workers from an emotional and psychological perspective? What are your thoughts there?
Well, for our employees, they have very complex jobs. They wear multiple hats throughout the day in the work that they do, and they're often changing those hats depending on the supports that they're providing and where they're providing them. They're working directly with a person or their family, and so the work that they do is incredibly important and complex. And we've, as Corey said, we have had a staffing shortage for years. The pandemic just exacerbated it. It just made it so much worse. We're still struggling develop a full workforce. And so our current workforce are working extremely hard. They're working additional hours every single week. They're getting tired. They love the work that they do and they're doing an incredible job. But we need to be able to hire more employees. And part of that is that we need to be able to offer them the same types of incentives, the same types of wages that comparable work in our communities are receiving. So our government needs to make a commitment to employees, to increase the wages of our employees right across the board.
Absolutely. And I'm also curious to get your perspective, either one of the two of you, in terms of the level of independence that's offered to the people who are directly receiving these services and the importance of continuing to foster a sense of independence and how the increased funding and resources allows people with developmental disabilities to receive a sense of independence. What are your thoughts there?
I can speak to it first, Corey, and then if you want to jump in, my thoughts around that are really, I go back to the people on wait lists who are, it's almost as though their lives are on hold. They can't move out of their family home because they don't have the appropriate supports and resources to do so. So their lives are on hold. Someone may be ready, willing, and able to get a job, but they don't have the support to do so. They may need assistance to move out on their own. Their family may not have the capacity to do it. They might be living with parents who are aging, and so they're waiting. I believe one of the things that I had heard previously, which really, really kinds of sums it up, is that these supports and services for people they're not luxuries. They're lifelines. People require these essential supports to live a good life in their community, and they're not receiving them.
Absolutely. And Corey, did you want to jump in with some thoughts on that question?
Yeah, maybe just to add that, when these services are unavailable or inconsistent, it drastically hinders people's social and emotional development and often leads to isolation, not just for the person, but for families also. Families are significantly impacted. They often end up bearing the burden of providing care where services fall short. Without adequate supports, both people with disabilities and their loved ones face heightened stress, diminished opportunities for growth, and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen, building on the idea of inclusion, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the family aspect of how the funding shortfall is affecting sort of the social and emotional development and sort of morale of families. What are families telling you about this situation and their concerns? What are your thoughts there?
I've heard from families, they feel hopeless. They're concerned, especially aging families. What's going to happen to my son or daughter when I'm no longer here to take care of them? The uncertainty of their futures for their sons and daughters is hugely stressful, as Corey said. Families, as Corey said again, they're isolated. It affects their mental health. Many families are one medical emergency away from a crisis. Their family goes through a medical emergency. A family recently, mom went to the doctor and the doctor immediately said, you need to go to the hospital. Your blood pressure is too high. And so the doctor's office called the mom's family member, cousin, and said, you need to get over and take care of her daughter. She was in the hospital for 10 days without supports for her daughter at all. She's basically the sole support for her daughter. So that, fortunately, mom came home. She's well. but she's also in her 80s, and she's very concerned. What happens next time? Who takes care of my daughter? What happens if I don't make it? Who takes care of my daughter? What is going to happen to her? There's so many families in that situation that they don't know what the future holds for themselves or for their family member. It's hugely stressful for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about passport funding and how important this program in particular is to the ecosystem of developmental disability services. I know that most families, if they get approved for this funding has to make the funding last throughout the year. So when it's not adequately funded, I know there's a severe effect when that happens. So I'm wondering if we can talk about passport funding and how important that program is specifically. What are your thoughts there?
Corey, do you want to answer? Do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah, I can jump
Okay.
in. No, passport funding, provides eligible people with funding to access developmental services of their choice, but the current structure of the funding is insufficient, right? And as a result, many people aren't able to access the full scope of services that they require. I think our average allocation in the province is around 11,000. People can receive up to 40, and the minimum is 5,500, but that average around 11,000 often fails to cover essential supports for people, and in particular for those people that have greater needs. Addressing shortcomings of funding would ensure that Passport can address its intended purpose, which is to empower people to live fulfilling, independent lives through access to the necessary services in their community. It just
Yeah,
isn't enough to provide a wraparound service for so many people.
absolutely. And this is a general question to the two of you, and I'm curious to your message when it comes to burnout, both on the direct professional side for those providing care and the family members who may be providing care to their loved ones. What's your message about the importance of the province knowing sort of the burnout factor of what's involved here and your message to those in particular groups as well? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think you're right. There's a burnout factor. There's a burnout factor for employees who are burning the candle at both ends. There's also the burnout factor for families, and part of that is that families don't even realize the amount of support that they are providing to their family member. We have a family leadership group that's connected to our agency called Ensemble, and they provide leadership and resources to families, and had tried to. They're struggling to get families involved in the work that they do, even if it's to try to give families a short break, to join up with other families. And they're struggling to get families involved because families are saying, I don't have time to do that. I am so busy with all the other facets of my life. I don't have time for myself. I don't have time to connect with another family. And so families even taking a little bit of time for themselves, they're not able to do that, or they don't have the energy to do that. And the few times that they have been involved, one family had said to the family consultant, said that, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I needed this. I forgot what it was like to spend an afternoon with other families or with other families who are living the life that we are living, and really just to connect. Haven't had a chance to do that in years. And so those are the types of things that our families are going through. And to be able to let our government understand, again, that the supports and services, they're not luxuries, they're lifelines for people we support and for families.
Yeah, absolutely. And Corey, I'm curious from an operational perspective, your message to frontline staff about effectively managing burnout. What are your thoughts there, my friends?
Well, it has been a long haul, Kevin, and I think one of the things that we've had to take stock of and really consider is how are we supporting our employees and how are we supporting them from a wellness standpoint. Throughout the pandemic and following after, we've engaged in initiatives across the organization to ensure that we're communicating gratitude to our employees, that they know how valuable they are, that they hear thank you often, that they understand the impact of their commitment. And we've also endeavored to really engage our employees in that conversation about mental health and wellness and ensure that they have access to appropriate resources as such. However, we do believe that the variable that stands to make the greatest impact is to help to make the sector sustainable, increase funds, allow us to build our workforce, ensure that employees see that help is on the way. We're probably about 7 to 8% below our typical operating capacity in terms of staff, and what would make a huge difference to our employees is our ability to close that gap as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. And more a generalized question for the two of you in terms of what steps you think the local community can take, whether it be from a local government perspective. I know this is a provincial problem, but I'm also curious to know what steps do you think either the general public can take in terms of wanting to be an ally if they're watching or listening to this and they want to gain support? And what sort of power do you think our local government has to be an ally in this fight as well? What are your thoughts there?
Well, we have a really positive working relationship with our local MPP. So we provide supports and services across Essex County. So we cover uh, Windsor-Tecumseh, Leamington, Chatham, Kent, Leamington, and we also cover Essex. So we have 3 MPPs that we work very closely with. They are very good at bringing our concerns and our issues forward to the Minister of Children, Community, and Social Services. So we have those relationships. We also have very positive relationships with our local municipalities. We meet with our mayors frequently. We provide updates at an annual mayor's luncheon. We also have very good relationships with local media. So we're able to, when we have this media campaign that we're doing right now, the hashtag Waiting to Belong, where we're really trying to bring some awareness to the crisis that developmental services is in right now with the 52,000 people on a wait list. Locally, we provide numbers and we provide information that hits home, that we can bring awareness in our communities as well through our local media. So for instance, the Developmental Services Ontario, the data registry for 2024, so just this year, there are 1,406 people waiting for accommodation support. So that would be 24-hour supported group living. It could be supported independent living, host families, or any kind of specialized accommodation or residential type of supports. There's also 2,493 people waiting for community participation supports in Windsor, Essex, and 2,196 people waiting for caregiver respite. Those numbers just for our local community are huge. And so to get that information out to the general public so that not only our agency is speaking to our government representatives and our municipalities, that people that, everyday people are aware of what's happening. And they're able to then go to their local MPP and they're able to, hop on board and really help us bring those messages home. But it's making them aware that this is an issue for people with disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything gets done faster through collaboration, doesn't it?
It does. Absolutely, it does.
Absolutely. And I wanted to dive more into the 28,000 people who are currently waiting for housing or residential support. I know in Windsor and Essex County there's a overall housing shortfall, and I can only imagine that from a developmental disability service perspective, as you shared with me, Karen, a problem continues to sort of evaporate itself. But I'm curious if we can drill down specifically into what do you think needs to be done to diversify the opportunity to address this problem specifically. What are your thoughts there?
Uh, well, first I would say affordability. You know, a number of the people that we support, the majority of the people that we support are receiving ODSP. And ODSP does not allow for a person to be able to move out on their own, move out of their family home to pay rent. It's just not feasible for somebody who's on ODSP, and even somebody who's on ODSP and has a part-time job or even a full-time job, it's unaffordable or unattainable for someone to be able to pay rent without having one or two housemates to share the expenses. In addition to that, the availability of affordable housing, affordable apartments, that is it's an issue all around for everyone. There are some programs that people that we support in our agency have really hooked up to with the City of Windsor. There's some rent subsidy programs, which has been very, very helpful for people, but there's so few of them, and there's such long waiting lists for them. So again, if someone were able to move out on their own with very minimal supports from their family home, there's nowhere for them to move. So again, it goes back to that person's life is on hold, their family's life is on hold. You know, their independence, as Corey said, their autonomy, their ability to be involved in their community, that all stops. Housing is a huge, huge issue. Corey, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Maybe just that this is an area where perhaps local government can be helpful by playing not only the supportive role, but to advocate, promote accessible, affordable housing initiatives, to support community-based organizations and services by sometimes facilitating unique and innovative partnerships amongst local agencies and other organizations that may be involved in the housing sector as well. I think this is that one area where local government could be leveraged, and there are some opportunities, but as Karen said, they're few and far between, and a tremendous barrier to people living inclusive lives is the availability of affordable housing. Often if you get housing right, the support costs aren't quite as high. If somebody's living in a community where they belong, they have access to all of the amenities and facilities, and they aren't isolated within that community, their reliance on paid supports is nowhere near what it is, when that's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to also ask you the effect of inaction around this issue from a mental health and practical standpoint. What are the results if inaction is the stance of the government, or even dragging of their feet in this issue? What are the effects of inaction on this issue, in your opinion? What are your thoughts there?
I think a couple of things. First of all, our government in 2020 introduced a plan to reform developmental services. It's called Journey to Belonging, Choice and Inclusion. And so the idea or the ultimate goal around this reform, and it's going to take 10 or more years to really look at developmental services. What ways can our government, agencies like ours, and families work together to create more inclusive opportunities for people, which also includes creating more individualized funding for people and families, meaning that funding will go directly to families, similar to the passport program that you spoke of, but funding will go directly to families, and they will have purchasing power. They will be able to purchase the supports and services that they would choose, when they choose them, with whom they choose, to determine what a good life looks like for each person, which is the ultimate goal. However, if there are no funds that are going to be allocated to this reform, people are still going to be on wait lists. They're going to be waiting for individualized funding. They're going to be, the reform to have choice and be included in community. It's a wonderful vision. It's what we all strive for. It's aspirational, but if it's not resourced properly, it's meaningless to people. So there's a lot of work to do with regard to our government's reform process, again, which is a wonderful vision for people and families and organizations like ours, but it needs resources to keep it moving, to make it become a reality.
Absolutely. And for the two of you, as we wind down our time together this afternoon, I'm curious, how do you each define an inclusive future for folks with developmental disabilities where they can really have a true sense of inclusive belonging and independence? So how do you define an inclusive future for individuals with developmental disabilities?
I know, Corey, do you want to start? I've done a lot of talking.
Sure, I can jump in. I define an inclusive future for people with developmental disabilities means access to education, access to employment, access to adequate health care, a good life in the community. It's a future where barriers are dismantled, people are empowered to live with dignity and purpose, and a commitment to equity is going to be required, sustained investment on behalf of the government into services and supports. Let's not forget, we're at our core a grassroots movement, and it's going to require that kind of effort on the grassroots level to fix the deep problems that exist within our sector. But I think opportunities like this keep the conversation alive, gain momentum, raise that awareness so that it's not just us who are talking about issues like this, that others can raise awareness in the community as well, and hopefully bring enough attention to the matter that the government has no choice but to respond.
Karen, what are your thoughts on the issue of an inclusive future for people with developmental disabilities in Ontario? What are your thoughts there?
Well, exactly what Corey said. And, just building on that a little bit, it's people who can live, work, and play in their communities just like I can, just like you can, just like Corey can, that we can live a life of our choosing, that we have purchasing power, that we have choice, and that that people with disabilities are not just in their local communities, that they're included. They're included in the life of the community, that they're welcome into the community, that they have the same opportunities, as Corey said, to get a job, to, join a club, to go to school, to have a family doctor, to have, to be treated well, to make decisions about what a good life looks like for them.
And to not have to wait 10 years for that to happen.
Exactly. Or 20.
Yeah.
Patience is a virtue, but not in this case, right?
Absolutely. Right.
Absolutely. And as we wind up our time together this afternoon, I'm curious, is there anything else the two of you wanted to share that I didn't ask you this afternoon?
I guess, for an agency like ours, I just want to throw out there that we're not asking the government for a handout. That's not what we're doing. We do our part. We create efficiencies. We look at technology. We try to use everything at our disposal to ensure people have autonomy and they have supports as much as we can. And we have great community support for our fundraising because we are solely funded by the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. And, we have some shortfalls with that. So we do rely on some major fundraisers throughout the year, and we have great community support for those. And we have great partnerships. And so I didn't want to leave that out, in our conversation, that there's many, many issues that we have to address here, but also wanted to say that, within our community, within Essex County, we do have a huge support network that we count on.
Absolutely. Corey, is there anything else you wanted to share?
Maybe I'll just leave the final words, hopefully, to emphasize the human impact, right? Waiting for years for services leads to anxiety, depression, not just in the person waiting for services, but their families and caregivers as well. It really adds up to be one heck of a wicked problem. That I think in order to comprehensively address, we need increased and sustainable funding, not just for supports and services, but also for mental health supports and services for families. It's been a long haul, and a long haul without a whole lot of hope, and families deserve that. It's, for me, a human rights issue, and I think we need to leave the final word with that incredible human impact that we all should sit with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank the two of you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon about this incredibly important issue. I want to thank you for the work that you've done to promote inclusion and belonging for individuals and families with developmental disabilities. And I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Well, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Our pleasure.